Alright, so now that we've gone over some of the elements of the editor here, I'll go over them a little more in detail once we start creating stuff. So let's start with our project window down here in the corner. So we're going to create a folder. So this folder is going to be called scripts. So that's where we're going to put all of our script files. Every script that we write, every C# script that we work on is going to go down here in scripts. Then we're going to create a folder called prefabs. And then we're going to create a folder for scenes. Having a little brain fart moment. After we have scenes, we have... For right now, I think that's good. But then inside scripts, so we're going to go into our scripts folder here, and we're going to create a folder for player scripts. We're going to create a folder for... enemy scripts. Create a folder for object scripts. And we're also going to, as I pointed out in the first video where I showed you what the game was going to end up looking like, we're going to create a folder for the city generator. So the city generator is going to generate us a city. Surprise. So let's get right into it. Oh, and I forgot about one folder, the input folder. So we're going to do what's called abstraction with the input. So the input objects are going to work on the player in order to move the player. And I'll explain that once we get into writing the scripts for the player. So the next thing, we're going to create our player object. So I'm going to come over here to the hierarchy, and I'm going to create an empty object. So this object just has a position, right? So I can set this to 0, 0, 0. We're going to name this object, so you can either right-click rename, or you can double-click on the name in order to, or double-click on the name. If you quick double-click on the name, the Unity scene will actually center on the object, which is cool. So in this case, we're going to call this player. So this is our player object. It has a, it's going to be what holds all of our player stuff. So to this, we're going to add a 3D object. Actually, so you know what? We're going to take a step back real quick, and I'm going to create a capsule 3D object. Not cylinder. I don't want a cylinder. I want a capsule. So there we go. So there's our capsule, and I'm actually going to call this capsule a player. It makes it a little bit easier. I have a mesh filter capsule, a capsule collider, which is our collision element, and a mesh renderer. So this renders the mesh onto the screen. Without the mesh renderer, you can't see it. The mesh filter is the actual mesh itself, and then the capsule collider allows it to trigger collisions with other objects in the world, such as the ground. So in order to have it collide with the ground, then we need all of these things to happen, or in display on the camera. So now we've created that. If we come back over to our game, you can see that the capsule is indeed being rendered on the screen. So this is I'm going to call this capsule my player. So this is the player object. This is the thing that's going to move around the game. So inside of the player, so since this is a first-person game and we have a player object here, we want this player object to actually contain the camera. So we're going to come over here, and we're going to take our main camera here, and I'm going to move that camera inside, so you can drag it right onto the player, and move that camera inside of the player. This allows us to, this means that camera will inherit the position of the player. So if I take the player, and you can see that I move the player, the camera moves along with it. That's because this object, the camera's object position, is based on whatever the position of the object above it is. In this case, because the player is the top level object, moving the top level object moves all the rest of the objects underneath it. This will be important to know later because when we actually add a weapon onto the screen, that object is going to actually inherit it be inherited by the camera. So when the camera moves, when the camera looks around, then the actual weapon is going to follow us with the camera. So, but we don't want the camera to be all the way out here like a third-person game. We're actually going to move the camera right inside of this. So it's going to have you're going to see that it has a X position of 0. So that means it's not different. So this can be whatever, the player itself can be whatever position it wants. But the main camera is, so if I set this to 0, 0, 0, it is the very center of the player's capsule. But in this case, I want it to be at the head, the very top of the capsule. So I'm going to set this value to 1, which is from 0 all the way up to the head value of 1. So now you won't be able to see the camera in the camera preview here, or the capsule in the camera preview here, because the camera is actually now inside of the capsule itself. So now that we've got our object here created, we can now begin to add scripts. So the next step is to start scripting, but before we do that, we're going to save our scene so that we don't lose our progress. So I'm just going to hit Control S because I haven't created a scene yet. It's going to allow me to do this. It's going to bring me to this window. I haven't saved this specific scene. So let me open up the Scenes folder under Assets, and I'm going to call this game.unity. So this is our game scene. If I were to have multiple scenes, for example, I could have a main menu scene, and that scene could then transfer over into the game scene. But we're not going to go over menus or anything like that right now, so we just need the game scene. So I created the game scene, and you can open up the game scene from your assets folder whenever you feel like. And just double click that and you'd be able to open the assets scene. Sometimes when you open Unity, it doesn't open the most recent scene, so you have to open it with the scene, and you can just do that by double clicking this. So now that we've saved our game, let us start up our code editor. In this case, as I mentioned in the intro, in case you skipped the intro, I'm going to be using Visual Studio. But if you use MonoDevelop, this is going to be a very similar setup. Your window's just going to look different. We're going to be writing the same code regardless, though. So let us move on to code.